an intro that I'm going to run before I do the introduction as soon as we get up. Hi, my name is Greg Suddy. This is Suddy on Soccer. I'm here with Erik Bergrud. Thank you so much for joining me. If you don't know Erik Bergrud and who he is and what he does as far as American indoor soccer is concerned, then you probably shouldn't be watching. No, I'm kidding. He's the MASL announcer for the Kansas City Comets, and he's got a long list of other things going on. Welcome, Erik.
Thanks so much for having me here, Greg. Pleasure to see you again. It was this past January in San Diego where we stood up and did a post-game interview at the only Pechanga Arena, and it's good to see you again.
Yeah, good as well. Good to see you. Before I get started on just kind of going through your story, you bring up that meeting that we had in San Diego, and I'd like to mention something that took place, an occurrence that took place. You got back together again briefly with Mario Luna, who was there in the house at the game. Tell a little bit about the story about what that was.
Yeah, so we were part of a small band of let's just say outrageously loud and possibly obnoxious, depending on your perspective, supporters of the Los Angeles Lasers. We used to sit behind the goal at what was then the Fabulous Forum, and we were Mahoney's Maniacs. And so I was best man at Mario's wedding, and I've been away from Southern California for a long, long time. And so he drove down from I'm not sure which freeway he took. I assume he ultimately got on the 5, came down to watch, and I appreciate, Greg, you reconnecting us there at Pechanga Arena. And so he and I had a great chat, and it wasn't a great night for the Kansas City Comets. They attempted a game plan. It didn't work, and there you go.
Right. Well, talking about Southern California, you that's where you started. I mean, you're a San Pedro guy growing up. What was it like growing up in the Long Beach, San Pedro area for you?
Well, I'm old school enough that I still call it Pedro. So if you're like local okay. From back in the day, you call it Pedro rather than Pedro. But either way, potato. Grew up there, played club soccer there, played high school soccer there, and really got a lot of soccer experiences before indoor had hit in Southern California. So got to watch multiple North American Soccer League outdoor teams. One of the highlights of my life being a chance to watch George Best and the LA Aztecs host Pele and the New York Cosmos at the LA Memorial Coliseum. Is one of those lifetime experiences I got when I was young. Got to see a lot of semi-pro soccer on Sundays there in San Pedro. And so I was in a really rich soccer culture. And so I loved it. And then when indoor came along, I was totally hooked.
Yeah. And you were, well, first off, let me ask you, because you're saying that you started playing younger than high school. I guess you told me that you were younger than a teenager, in fact, when you started playing soccer. Have you always been a keeper?
No. So I started playing when I was 7. Now that's like old time because kids, hey, doctor, thanks for watching. So I started at 7, which back then would have been normal. Now today they're starting at 3. So I actually started off as a forward, and my second year I scored 23 goals, which at the time was pretty good. But at one point I decided, hey, I want to try this goalkeeping thing. And so I became a goalkeeper. I raised my hand to do it. And that was it.
And that was, the rest is history.
Yeah. So I have the scars to prove it. I two pretty significant injuries in high school. On my, I want to say my 15th birthday, a guy put his foot into my arm and broke it. And then the next year, I was going down to the ground to collect the ball, and a guy put his knee into my nose and chipped the bone, and I still can't breathe clearly, like if I'm outside.
Oh no!
From a soccer injury.
Wow.
So and then on to college, and then more problems. So I'm sort of like a living proof of goalkeeping is a crazy profession, if that's what you want to have.
And the Los Angeles Lasers was your introduction to indoor soccer in the original MISL. Is that correct?
Technically, well, depends on how you parse the question there, Greg. So I did get an opportunity to watch an LA Aztecs North American Soccer League game at the Forum, but really NASL was, and this is before the soccer sort of made the pivot indoors. This was like, okay, we got to do something during the off months. And so it was quality, but it wasn't really the NASL's focus at the time. This is, I think, the 80-81 season, but it was the 82-83 season when LA came in. That was the year the Sockers played for the first time in the MISL. They had won in NASL, and they joined in. And this experience on a November night at the Forum and watching indoor soccer, and that year the Lasers had a laser light display on the wall. It was one amazing production, and I was hooked.
Yeah. And tell the story about how you ended up getting your first season tickets.
Yeah. So when I was in middle school, I got the idea that being before there were assistant referees, ARs, they were called linesmen. And so I got the idea that, hey, it might be a good way to make some money is to be a lineman. So my weekends wound up being playing soccer and then rushing from my game to referee 2 or 3 games. And so I made enough money, saved enough money where I paid for my own season ticket my senior year in high school.
Wow.
And as I said, our seats were behind the goal at the Forum, and the 1984-85 season was a few highlights and a lot of lowlights. We came down to San Diego in November or maybe December of that season, really playing well, and everybody was feeling good. Fans came down. Thank you, Brian Roth. I'm wearing this jersey tonight in honor of you and St. Louis City FC. The Sockers hosted $1 margarita night, and so the fans were all pumped up, and the Lasers got shellacked. So I like to say, Suddy, and maybe you'll remember this, is when the Sockers would come out for pregame and the stadium PA would play Rock This Town by the Stray Cats, if you were a visiting team, you knew you were done, because that was it. First second that the Sockers came onto the sports arena turf, it was going to be a rough night. So the Lasers had a few rough nights in San Diego. I did come to the championship later in May when the Sockers beat the Blast. Came down for one of those games, and then the following year I came down for Sockers Strikers. So I have a lot of great memories, not just with the Lasers, but having watched some Sockers championship runs back then.
Well, I mean, my goodness, the atmosphere back in those days, especially those championship series at the Pechanga Arena, was just unbelievable. I mean, it was. I remember a few times I came in, they sold out. I don't know, it was 7 hours or something like that. Sold out 13,000 seats. And I was able. It was like you can get a seat here or here or here, and I just got a seat at the very back wall at the very top of the arena, so that I could figure I could just stand for the whole game.
Yeah. Well, I seem to recall. I seem to recall they would have park and ride deals with some of the pubs in San Diego. So you could back then you could go to a pub and get on a bus and then go from the pub to the sports arena and back, and so. It was quite a time and quite a moment, and the world has changed a lot. It's become way more competitive in the sports environment. There was not a North American Soccer League anymore in that 84, 85 era. And so
Right.
it's hard to imagine today that the United States national team was competing for a World Cup bid with indoor soccer players. And that was the world we lived in back then.
That's correct. That absolutely it was. That's what it was. So after the you ended up going to college. Now, did you go to college at the university you're currently working at?
No.
Okay.
So I wound up going from LA to New York. So I went to Fordham University. We talked off air about Vince Scully. Vince Scully went to Fordham too. And so I went there on I went there on an academic scholarship, and I was a walk-on goalkeeper. So 3 goalkeepers, really competitive. Fordham is a D1 school, and I got a little bit of playing time, but not as much as I wanted my freshman year. So I was committed in the off season to really start working out, push myself a little bit. And then something happened to me that derailed my soccer career forever. But before maybe we go there, one of the interesting things that was going on in New York then, Greg, actually, let me take a step back. This is sort of an interesting context. You might say, why would anybody in their right mind leave Southern California and go to New York for college, right? People usually go the other way. So I had this, before people talked about algorithms, I had this algorithm in mind in terms of what I wanted to do. Okay. I wanted to go to a quality academic institution. I wanted to go to a D1 school, and I wanted to go to a school that had an MISL team in its market. See how that works? And so the goal was quality education. I could play D1 soccer and watch Missile on the side. So I get admitted to Fordham early admission in November of '84, and then a few months later, the New York Cosmos fold. So that my plan automatically got derailed. But sort of an interesting thing happened is in the spring. So I was a student there. I got there in the August of '85. In the winter, this new startup on Long Island called the New York Express started playing some exhibition games, like against Arsenal and some other teams. And then they were given an MISL franchise in the fall of '86. And so I wound up getting an indoor soccer, an MISL team, but it's not exactly what I expected. And then as I was mentioning, so I went back home to work out over the summer. I was working a job, and one afternoon, I all of a sudden had an equilibrium problem, and I did a head first into a friend's counter and had to go to the hospital, broke my tooth, had blood work done, and I was diagnosed with Epstein-Barr virus, which really made it hard for me. My equilibrium, I was tired all the time. It's kind of like mono on steroids, but I had a hard time with balance getting up and down. And so you can imagine that might be a problem if you're a goalkeeper, right? So
yeah, a little bit.
That was, I mean, ultimately my career ended 87. I mean, for the most part, and I stopped playing for decades, and I picked it up again recently, but it's still an issue because I'm not going to let a ball in the goal, right? So if I exert myself too far diving, I come up and I feel dizzy. So it just is what it is.
Right. How long did you stay in New York?
I was there for 3 semesters. I wound up taking a semester off because it was just too hard to go to school. And then one of these interesting things, I met somebody at a soccer boosters convention, and we both transferred to the University of Kansas.
Oh, gotcha.
KU, I mean, even if I could have played, KU didn't have a D1 soccer team. They had a club team. So I refereed there and ultimately wound up staying in the area, moved to Kansas City, became a Kansas City Comets season ticket holder, and then later a Kansas City Attack season ticket holder. And so that's kind of how I wound up there. Life goes on. I wound up ultimately, eventually getting remarried, and am happy today. And I've been in Kansas City since 1990.
And when did your relationship with Park University start?
Yeah, so in 91, I wound up becoming a graduate student here at Park. And so what's interesting about 91 is that's the year that the original Comets folded, and then the Atlanta Attack moved to Kansas City to become the Kansas City Attack of the NPSL. And so I was here at for the first year, and then in the middle of that first year, there was a job opening. So I came to work at Park. I left for a while in the 90s, but off and on, I've been at Park for 25 years, take or leave. And so I have a master's degree from here. My wife has one of her master's degrees from here, and then our son is a junior here. So it's a extended Park family.
Well, and you're also, I mean, you're working there now. What is your job? What do you do there on campus?
So my day job is Chief Strategic Communications Officer. So we do media relations, university communications, social media, et cetera. You can kind of see how this all connects. And then in 2014, I was given an opportunity to fill in as public address announcer for Park Soccer. And I guess they liked me. And so I'm in my 10th season as the voice of Park Pirates Soccer.
I saw that. And you're also calling the local WPSL team. Is that right?
Yeah, Casey Courage. And so they had come to watch one of their players, or they were scouting players at one of our women's soccer games. And this was like in 2016. And they said, "Hey, what are you doing next summer?" And nothing. What do you have in mind? And so I've been, since 16, I've been their public address announcer, which has been kind of fun too. And then the Comets came calling in 2019. It was supposed to be a one-game trial to be Nick Vassos as color commentator. And they said after the game, "Hey, do you want to stay?" And here I am.
Well, one of the things, and well, before I get there, you mentioned in some conversation that we were having last week, earlier this past week, a little bit about the NPSL. You mentioned the references to the multi-point system. You also made the comment about tolerance for physical play. I think those are two interesting points to bring up. In the case of the multi-point system, do you miss it?
No. So the way I describe it on air, though, because Nick Vassos and I have talked about it, it's kind of like cheesy old music that you love, even though it's not really that good for you. You just can't help yourself. And so I know that purists don't like it. And when there was a choice, when the PASL and NPSL, and the MISL 3 merged, there was a choice because one league was playing multi-point system and the other was playing 1 point, and they decided to go to 1 point. I thought that was a great thing. But there were some crazy games, Greg, where a game-winning goal would be a 3-pointer and the place would go nuts. It was an interesting time because your Soccers were in the CISL in that era. And so it was almost like indoor soccer got bifurcated in the 90s. You had the CISL playing summer. You had the NPSL playing the more traditional winter schedule, and some players bouncing between the two. And so we didn't, because TV was a little bit different back then, we didn't get a lot of CISL games. I do remember catching a few, but it was mainly a focus on NPSL here, and it was an everything goes. We joke about it all the time because Nick Vassos used to call Kansas City Attack games back then. It's like, if you don't die, you probably need to get up because there may not be a whistle. So, I mean, it wasn't that extreme, but it felt like it was that extreme.
Right. And so that sort of segues into the conversation, that the mention of tolerance towards physical play.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, that's what was going on in the NPSL. It was a physical league.
So you and I in the 80s followed Western Conference teams in the MISL. there's always seemed to be a couple different styles jockeying in indoor soccer. And back then, it was more of a run and gun style. If you think about some of the teams in the 80s, you had the Sockers, the Las Vegas Americans, the Lasers, Tacoma Stars, etc. These teams wanted to score goals. You had teams like the Baltimore Blast and the Cleveland Force. They were playing defense, defense, defense. And so there was always a contrast in styles. It's just sort of a question
Absolutely.
of how do you make sense of that? And if you're a referee, are you supposed to let everything go, or do you see how the game goes and decide? But the teams in the East always, to me, from a Western perspective, played more physically. And in the NPSL, it didn't matter where you were. It was going to be a physical game regardless. But I think now, if you look at the MASL, I kind of feel I don't want to say it's exactly like the old MISL days, but it feels like hearkening back to the MISL days, because the Western teams, for the most part, are wanting to play. They're wanting to score. And there's some Eastern teams that have some grudges to bear. And so Brian Roth dropped in about the old Kansas City Attack, St. Louis Ambush rivalry, which is physical. And then you fast forward to today, Comets Ambush, Comets Wave, Wave Blast, Comets Blast. These teams, and then UCFC Blast. These teams generally, once they get on the field, there's some hard feelings out there. And so it in a way, I don't know if it's NPSL-esque, Greg. For me, maybe it's more like old school MISL, where the Eastern teams just battled each other.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that observation. So as the color commentator for the Kansas City Comets, you're working with Nick Vassos, and both of you guys have just a ton of history, a knowledge of the history, and bring it up in the conversation during the course of the games that you call. And I just got to say, that is for me the deciding factor. I've commented on it. I chatted about it and commented on it before, but because both of you are great at what you do anyway. But to add that touch of history and knowledge of the history and solid memory too of how things played out back in the day, and in contrast or comparison or just a notification of, I think you guys are the best team calling the MASL soccer today.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I'll say I've learned a lot working with Nick Vassos. He is a professional, period. He's also on air every day on a local television station. So he is really comfortable in front of the camera. I only stepped on his toes, interrupted him maybe 3 times, if I remember right, that first game. And so I still, if I go back and watch recordings from this past year, there's some times where it's like, oh man, this was Nick's moment and I couldn't help myself. This is the problem about putting 2 public or play-by-play announcers in the same booth together. But we have a lot of respect for the other announcers around the league. I've talked a lot with your friends just up north on 15, the team from Empire, and I saw the doctor here and obviously Philly and Panda. What we do in Kansas City wouldn't work at Empire, because we have this history to draw from. We can tell stories that we remember because the Comets are a different kind of franchise. This would not work in an Empire where it's relatively young. And so it would just be a mismatch. And so I think we're fortunate that we have the right setting to do what it is we do. But I like listening to other announcers around the league. We have a lot of respect for a lot of other teams. We spend a lot of time on air and off air with our friends up in Milwaukee, and it's great always when Art Kramer jumps into Twitch and he'll comment in the chat on there too. But
absolutely.
Eddie Puskarich, I learned so much from him, and congratulations to him being signed as head coach of Dallas. But if you go back and watch some of the games from this past year, the way he reads the game, he is a color commentator in a way that I'm not. He really understands coaching strategy. So it did not surprise me that he was hired. It's kind of like, you should remember this, back when Pat Riley was the LA Lakers color analyst, and he wound up replacing Paul Westhead as the Lakers coach. And so you have somebody who really understands the game sitting in that color seat, moving in, and I expect Eddie to do great things there. But if you listen to his broadcast, you kind of get a sense of how he reads the game and maybe what he's going to try to do this year as coach of the Sidekicks. I like that, Doctor.
Yeah, that was an interesting. I mean, and I know, and respect both of. Yeah, I know and respect both of those guys up there in Empire. Also, in fact, I'm going to be seeing them tomorrow at the Kings Cup.
Is this actually Michael King? Is that actually Michael King, his Facebook user? I know that you explained that. So if that is Michael King,
no, I don't.
It could be Michael King. I had a great conversation with him. He was in town. He was in town. The annual coaches convention, which is coming to Anaheim here in January, he was in Kansas City for the coaches convention, and we were both at a reception that was hosted the night before the Comets played the Tacoma Stars at the T-Mobile Center. And Michael King, I remember him from his college days because I was playing one state away from him. He was playing in New Jersey. So a lot of respect for him. His Milwaukee Wave teams were just unbelievable. And just watching people around the bar when they saw him, so much respect for him and respect for players from that era. His teammate, a name you know really well, Suddy, Victor Nogueira. Yep, Fairleigh Dickinson University. Victor Nogueira pivoted from the Sockers in the MISL or MSL, I guess those last years, to the NPSL in Milwaukee, and would probably be my vote for all-time goalkeeper if we get a chance to vote it on the 50th anniversary, Suddy.
Oh, you would? That's how you would go? That's interesting. He had such a impactful career, and he also didn't give up for a long time. I mean, he had a long career too. He was always just a beast in the net. I mean, I would definitely, he's in the top 3 or 4 for me too, at least, if not at the top. That would be a hard one. I mean, there were so many good, fun goalkeepers back in that era that went through it, and today too. And it's really interesting because with conversation of the two eras, if you will, the goals today are bigger than they were in the MISL, the original MISL.
So if you want
to, I was just going to say. So on one side of that coin, the keepers are working harder, where the offensive players have a bigger shot, a bigger target to hit. So it's interesting. When you look at eras, comparing eras is a little difficult because of that.
So if you watch old MISO video, and there's one that comes up every year on the Comets, not the Comets official Facebook fan page, but the unofficial one, Hot Winter Nights. There's a clip of a game of the Chicago Sting at the Kansas City Comets, and the Chicago goalkeeper has a defender take a goal kick for him, if you can believe that. Back in the 80s, indoors, defenders were taking goal kicks, and the game has changed so much. You talked about the goals themselves getting bigger, but also now goalkeeper distribution rule that came in the 90s, but also goalkeepers playing with their feet. I'm old enough to remember when the goalkeeper rules were changed, and back when I was playing growing up, a goalkeeper didn't have to have great foot skills because for a variety of reasons. You could roll the ball to yourself in the box. Typically, defenders took your goal kicks, and then things changed a lot. And fast forward today, look at goalkeepers and how good they are with the ball at their feet. Think William Banzella, think Paulo in St. Louis, Boris Pardo, Danny Waltman, Chris Toth, the name goes on and on, or the list goes on and on and on. In those earlier days in the 80s, you had to be a shot stopper. And Victor Nogueira was the player who kind of pivoted the position as the goals got bigger, as the rules changed, and you had to be able to cover more ground. He was really that first goalie that bridged those eras. And so take that for what it's worth.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's true. That's an observation I had. I mean, you're absolutely right that he did make that transition, didn't he? How long did he play in Milwaukee?
He was there for a while. Michael might know better than I, or somebody who can Google pretty quickly, but he was playing into his 40s. And it was always a battle when Milwaukee came down to Kansas City because respect, but also there was a little bit of, I don't want to say animosity, but you might or might not remember that Keith Tozer was the Kansas City coach the first year of the attack. And then he wound up leaving, and there you go, 11 years. He wound up leaving and becoming Milwaukee's coach. And so there was this little thing between Kansas City and Milwaukee because Tozer had been the first attack coach here in Kansas City. And so the triangle, I guess you'd call it, between Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Kansas City, which still exists today, was real. And then you throw in Chicago with the likes of Karl-Heinz Granitza coaching and later Pato Marhetic. And so there was some – these people had history and history against each other.
Where do you see the MASL going in the near future? I mean, what kind of? I mean, we've got a new team coming up. They're saying, what is it in Guadalajara?
Yeah, date to be
2 years.
Date to be determined, right? So, a couple things I would say. So, I would be remiss if I didn't remind people that last year the league introduced a combine. It was held in Mesquite, home of the now rebranded Texas Outlaws, and they're going to do year 2 at Utica. That there's a realization that there is talent here in the United States, and so everything is changing so quickly, Greg. It used to be in the early years of Major League Soccer that you would go from college easily into MLS, and it's become harder and harder to make that as teams have looked into it more of a European, South American style academy model. There are fewer players going through the traditional route in, and so Kansas City, Tacoma have been, I would say, at the forefront of looking at local college players. And now with the combine, it's sort of a broader national approach. Is in a way, it's a little bit back to the future of how the MISL used to be, is in addition to identifying international players in, how do you grow and how do you find talent through the college ranks and then some of the other leagues. And so I see this league really focusing more on brand awareness, not just for fans, but for players to see this as an option if they want to continue their career. Because with Messi coming in, with the money that's being sprayed around in MLS, I see that going in a different direction. And so there's an opportunity to look at players who may not get that chance in MLS, but may be looking for something else. So that's one thing. I'd say what's second is, and just like you, I see all the comments online. Yes, there's cornhole, there's table tennis, there's pillow fights on ESPN. I get that. And I think that fans are frustrated. But if you look back really, Greg, into the history of how the MISL was televised, it really wasn't as glamorous as people might remember. There are some stations that no longer exist, that like Sports Channel America. There was like
USA.
USA. I didn't even have it when USA was doing those MISL broadcasts. So it wasn't reaching like the majority of Americans. There were some obscure channels that was on Something Business Network for a year. And so it wasn't like they were on ESPN for 20 years and then everything dropped. But the world's changing too. And ESPN has been laying off employees as they're battling against streaming. And so for For MASL, it's try to figure out how do we make the most of this streaming environment. People laughed at MLS when they moved to Apple, right? What were you thinking moving to Apple? You're on Fox Sports, you're on ESPN. Well, I think they figured something out.
I think they did too. They might have just really figured something out, because it's working for them big time. It's really working for them. And when I was speaking with JP a couple of days ago, I made the comment that that at first, of course, when the Twitch thing was done with the MASL, I'm not a gamer, so I'd never even heard of the channel, and I would be willing to bet that the majority of MASL fans were in that same camp, that they'd never even heard of it. There were some early glitches, I guess, with some of the early broadcasts that weren't really the best quality broadcasting. But I think by the end of the season, that was not anymore the case. I think the broadcasts were quality broadcasts. I mean, they sure were for me. I mean, I didn't have any problem watching them, whether it was on my devices or my television. I mean, I could get it no matter what. And it worked out pretty well. And the thing that was positive for me, and I mentioned this to JP, was that that format allows for the introduction of the sport to people that aren't already fans. And and YouTube didn't do that. You only watched it on YouTube if you were a fan. That's all it was ever going to be there, is people that were already fans to begin with. And that format introduced the sport to a lot of people, and it was fun. I mean, I'm not a big fan of some of the chat rooms. I mean, some of them get really out of hand. But the thing that was really cool about those chat rooms were those conversations with those fans, or those new people coming in asking questions. First off, what is this? And then second off, how does play work? What are some of the rules? What's going on with this game? Because of course, that's how you get yourself, become a fan of the sport, is to learn the nuances of it. And so the Twitch, I think, was good.
So I think there's a built-in conflict here, Greg, because there are very vocal, passionate, longtime fans of MASL who, on the one hand, like the access they have access to players, coaches, announcers, and yet want something bigger. And so how does the league transition to something bigger and people hold on to what they have right there? I mean, something's going to have to give. And so it's sort of a built-in conflict there. But I mean, ultimately, if you're in here for what's going to be best for the game, it's just like you said, it's opening up to different audiences. Yes. Have I had interesting in-game messages from Twitch fans while I'm announcing? I absolutely have. And I don't think that JP, Seamus Mallon, Ty Keogh, Randy Hahn, Bob Carpenter, Al Troutwig, and everybody else in the 80s had to deal with that. And so we're in a different world than they were back then.
Yeah, well, no doubt about that. And I mean, I also seem to recall there was a period. I want to say it was when the games were being broadcast on YouTube, where the league did turn off the chats for a while, and didn't allow the chat room to be open.
It's tough because we were seeing comments.
Everyone of these games, the broadcast, all the broadcasts have moderators now. I mean, not only is there the guy on, you calling the game, but there's somebody at home that's been, made the moderator that's blocking people, reading these things, making sure that the conversation stays light and easy and monitored. And that's, I mean, I just wish adults could be adults and play the game with, respect as far as what they say online. But I know that the passion is there, and given that forum, they're going to say things.
It raises sort of a bigger issue in that when we were watching games in the 80s, other than the few games that were on nationally, it was mainly your local broadcast. So in the case of San Diego, it was Randy Hahn on Channel 51. We could actually get those games in LA. For me, it was driving throughout Southern California, trying to keep a radio signal for the Lasers. Cause at the beginning, that was it, right? We didn't have TV. So
that's right.
I have a different take on this, but in today's world, the way the MASL is, we're announcing to our home fans, the visiting fans, and neutral fans. And then in Kansas City, it's a double whammy because we're simulcasting with a local TV station. And so how do you speak to all those audiences? And because it's a mixed audience, where you have in-game chat, there are hard feelings and raw feelings being expressed there. And I recall vividly a game last year where a Kansas City fan went way over the line. But it's a challenge for me on air, right? I can't say, hey, Kansas City fan, knock it off. I mean, I guess I could have, but it would have taken away from the game. And so we're kind of watching this happen on the side of the screen, all these comments, and still trying to focus on the game. But it's an interesting challenge announcing today, Greg.
Well, and if you were to respond to somebody like that, they've won, because that's exactly what they're trying to get, is some kind of mention, notoriety, attention. When they put that out there, I mean, a lot of the time it's really just kind of pushing a finger in somebody's chest, and seeing what happens from it. And so you really can, from a professional standpoint, allow yourself to engage that.
Well, and this is
it makes it really difficult.
The beauty. Yeah, I like that, Doctor. The beauty and the challenge of the streamed environment that we're in, unless everything is shut off and it's just the announcers, but then you lose some of the fan engagement. But some of the numbers have been just huge in terms of number of fans watching at a time. And I go back to my day where there might have been a few hundred of us in Southern California trying to get a Lasers radio signal. For me, we're making progress. If you go back to a very slim point in time where your team was drawing 15,000, but it felt like it was bigger then. But if you really peel it back, I mean, even here in Kansas City where we were sold out, there were problems with TV, there were problems with radio, there were all sorts of problems that people at the time knew. But it's easy to romanticize the good thing, and that's when I start throwing ancestor worshiping on air when we start getting into these conversations.
Well, and I mean, when the MISL one first folded, when it finally folded, I seem to remember there were only 7 teams across the country. I mean, there were only it wasn't even. I mean, I would call that a division, not a league.
And it was one division. Kansas City was one of the last teams out. Kansas City couldn't raise enough money. They were trying to do a season ticket thing, and they put together an ownership group, and it didn't take. And so that last season, which was 91-92, it was a one division, and it wasn't even MISL anymore. It was MSL because the league thought, hey, looking ahead to the 96 World Cup, we need to have the ability to potentially play outdoors as well. That was going to be really hard with 7 teams and barely holding it together indoor.
What I'm going to bring this up sort of hesitantly, and if just to make the conversation, what is your take on the other leagues that are starting up, the MSIL and the NISL? What is your take on that? A lot of in the case of MLIS, some of those teams are former, M2 teams. That have gone out to. What do you see in the relationship going forward? The only reason I even bring it up isn't to badmouth or be a supporter of either of those, just in how they relate to a relationship with the Major Arena Soccer League.
So let's start with MLIS since you mentioned it. we have I'll speak for Nick too. We have a lot of respect for Omaha Kings, who made the move from M2 to MLIS. They came into Kansas City a couple of years ago in exhibition and beat the Comets in overtime. And Comets wound up signing one of their players, Ali Sadal, who just got picked up as a free agent by St. Louis. And so there's definite talent in that league. I think the challenge with that league is the budget you would need to advance to MASL. And I think some of these teams know it. Cleveland, Crunch, they resuscitated the name. They did an event with Zoran Karic, one of your former players in San Diego. And this past year, they just don't have the financial bandwidth to be an MASL team. And so this is sort of the crux of the problem right now is how do you put together the right package of owners, corporate support, fan base support to make that move. And so for those fans who say there should only be one league, you're either going to have to change your model to accommodate these other teams, or they're going to have to go out of business. This league, and you heard JP say this on your show the other night, Greg, they're looking for NBA, NHL, celebrity type owners raising it up. They're not wanting to add in 2,000, 3,000 seat arenas right now. Right. And so if somebody were to find a way to get additional owners in one of those markets, then I think you start having really interesting conversations. But the NISL model is different. Women and men's teams playing on the same day. As somebody who announces both women and men's soccer here at Park, I totally get it. It's a very long day as an announcer when you're calling two games in a row, and I will tell you that. I think that it's sort of an interesting model, but I would have been interested to see if they had considered the possibility of playing on different dates where the women's team is in town while the men's team is on the road or vice versa, but I'm not privy to their math to figure out how they did it. I think having more cities exposed to indoor soccer is better for indoor soccer, but I understand the concern of MASL fans that this may be diluting the brand. I get that, but back to your last point, Greg, was it so great when there were 7 teams in major soccer league back in 91, 92? I don't think that was great.
Right. I mean, to roll it back to the very, very beginning of indoor soccer, there was the competition going on for a couple of years with the NASL and the MISL. And that was a huge, huge rivalry that ended up with ultimately, I think, 4 teams that moved into that last season that from the NASL to the MISL. But I don't see that same rivalry happening here for the reasons that you brought up. What I do see is a level of teams that are basically M2 level teams. And I understand why they wouldn't be interested. If you're the only professional indoor team in the marketplace, and your league is MASL 2, and you have to explain to your fans what is this 2 thing all about. You mean you're a second division team in a minor league sport? I mean, what's really going on here, buddy? So I understand how, from a marketing standpoint, those cities that aren't like with San Diego, where the soccer's 2 is easy to understand and explain, where the Empire Jets are easy to understand and explain. When you're the New Mexico Runners and you're the only team in the area that is doing indoor soccer, and you're marketing yourself as an MASL 2 team, I can understand where a team like the Chicago Crunch or the Cleveland Crunch might prefer to be able to market themselves Major League Indoor Soccer. I mean, we are Major League Indoor Soccer, and there is nobody else in their marketplace to tell them otherwise. Whether it's a team whether that team could compete in the MASL First Division or not is irrelevant from their own marketing standpoint.
So going back, none of this is new. If you go back to the 84 season we've been talking about, Greg, that was the launch of what was originally called the AISA, the American Indoor Soccer Association. Milwaukee Wave is the only remaining team from that. But there was pushback then about the quality, comparative quality. And then you looked at who was signing whom, how much everybody was getting paid. But ultimately what happened was the MISL model was not sustainable. They weren't generating enough revenue to pay their expenses. And AISA said, hey, we're going to rebrand as the National Professional Soccer League, and there you go. And so this isn't a new thing. I think that there's the world we live in is very different. The money in sports today is very different proposition than it was in the 80s. There's a story floating somewhere online about Andy Chapman. Probably remember him. He was on the Wichita Wings.
Of course.
Played in Baltimore, played in Detroit. I mean, he played in a lot of different places.
Absolutely, I recall.
I seem to recall that him saying that he could make as much money here in the U.S. as he could in the English First Division, now the Premier League. We're in a totally different world than what it was in the 1980s. If you think about then, right? So just to say, just to say, hey, why can't we go back to, well, if you have an owner who can write a $10 million check for one player, I'd say bring them into the MASL. We'll welcome them with open arms. But that's the world we're operating in.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys in Kansas City had an extraordinary season in the stands. I mean, you guys had a lot of fans come out to Dahmer Arena, and I believe you guys were the number one attendance draw in the league. And you weren't the only guys who had good turnouts, but that isn't yet. Now maybe you could send your marketing guys around the league to teach the other teams what it is you're doing right.
Hey, Brian Roth in the chat. Brian Roth is approachable. He was in the chat, so he's somewhere here watching this, probably getting ready for an MLS game happening in Kansas City later, where St. Louis City's playing Sporting Kansas City. But I get a little skeptical of one-size-fits-all approaches, Greg, because yes, there are things that work in certain markets, but sometimes there's markets that have their own unique challenges of a unique flavor. And so the other thing that is worth considering is, so if you go back to that 1980s era, NASL had folded. There was no competition for the MISL, right? So in a lot of the cities in the U.S., if you take the MLS map and the MASL map, you can see crossover. So St. Louis had the ambush by themselves, and then they got an expansion St. Louis City team. San Diego, soccer's, now you have an expansion team coming in a couple of years. And so how do you pivot and navigate where you are having competition in market, which didn't exist back in the 80s? And so it's just different. You have to find your niche, you have to find your lane, but ultimately understand that maybe owning your audience and holding on to that audience regardless of the size is a win and success, rather than defining success as we did this in 1987. I pick on 1987 a lot. So if we don't do it the way it was in 1987, it's a failure. Different world, different time.
Yeah. I mean, here in San Diego, it's an interesting situation because after this season, the Sockers will be moving to their new venue up in Oceanside. It's going to be a wonderful new state-of-the-art venue, but not most, but enough of the current fans are, don't want to drive to Oceanside. You need to stay in San Diego. Why aren't you doing this closer to the center of the population? What's wrong with Pechanga Arena? Well, I mean, I can answer that question.
I can answer that question too, Greg.
I mean, and it's not only from the standpoint of the fact that it was built in the 1960s. And it's not. I mean, it's also from the standpoint of the size of the venue relative to the San Diego Sockers. I mean, nearly 13,000 seats, and nobody in the MASL was drawing 13,000 fans. So it makes no sense to have to pay the rent for something like that. Also, there's and this is not unique to San Diego. Is the battle with other tenants at whatever the venue is for the right dates, for the better dates, the Friday nights and the Saturday dates. So you end up with teams playing on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and the Sockers the last couple of years has agreed pretty much decided to try to load up their schedule with Sunday games because it's earlier in the day, and it's on a weekend. But so maybe it doesn't cut into your Monday morning thing too bad because you're out of the venue by 7:30, which is when most games during Friday or Sunday games or Friday or Saturday games is when they start. But the 5 o'clock start, so you're able to get out of the game by 7:30 roughly. So the Sunday thing, but it's going to be interesting to see how the fan base responds to the new venue here in San Diego. Whether they make the travel from South Bay, that's where for instance, Cowboys. I mean, he lives almost on the Mexican border. I mean, he lives down in San Ysidro, and it's already a 35-minute drive for him to go from San Ysidro to Pechanga. It's another 25 or 30 minutes to get to Oceanside.
So I would say a couple of things here. First of all, we're not talking 56 game schedules where I think that there's Brian Roth self-promoting. There you go.
Absolutely.
Now you know where to find him if you want marketing advice for your team. So we're talking about 12 home dates rather than 28. So it's not as much of a commitment as it would have been in that earlier era. But the other thing, too, is the further north the Sockers go, you have Orange County that is a youth soccer hotbed. There are new fans there who may not have made the trip south that will now consider it for Oceanside. And so it's finding your niche. And in a market where you're going to experience MLS in its current form, it's a lot different than when this team started in 1996, when a lot of the teams were playing in empty stadiums. It's a different world that we operate in. And so holding MASL owners and teams to a standard from an earlier era, I just don't think it's fair because we operate in a very different environment. And you mentioned game nights. We experienced this in LA with the Lasers when they had to wait for the Lakers and the Kings and whomever else to fill up the dates first before they got their dates. Empires had some of the same problems. Imagine how life would be different if you're talking about Friday night, Saturday night only. For a team up there.
Right. And also there's a really good possibility that the North County neighborhoods of Escondido and Oceanside and Carlsbad and Encinitas and Vista and some of these places might just really embrace having a home team, right there on their doorstep. It might be something that they really, and especially if they start getting to notice that not only is it your home team now in your community, but it's a pretty good team too. They tend to play.
I guess if you say so.
So
if you say so. How many championships have you won now? I've lost track. Is it like 16 or I don't know? It's all a blur now.
But most importantly was the two most current ones, right? I mean, because prior to the two current ones, there was the argument that 10 of them are back in a whole different world, and
Yeah.
4 of them were from the PASL days, which a lot of people don't want to recognize as being worth anything. So, it's really important that the team has pulled themselves back. But in spite of that, the Sockers have always been, I mean, even right after the PASL and MISL come together, competitive. I mean, they've been playoff teams. It's not like they just sort of showed back up again. They've been on there and noticeable. And Kansas City is definitely a team that's pushing the envelope now. Also, they've been a team that's right there on the top of the game the last few years as well. It's disappointing to lose the Florida Tropics. I'm happy to see that there's talk about bringing in a team in Guadalajara. Nobody seems to be saying anything about Ronaldinho and the ownership idea that was announced a while back. I think the scuttlebutt had been something about a team in Las Vegas also, but nothing's been officially mentioned. So talking about the future, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a parallel though too, because MLS worked out a deal with David Beckham. It didn't happen overnight. Thank you, Doctor, for correcting my Southern California geography. So just a thought though about the soccer. So I had a running joke with Milwaukee Wave fans that year, the COVID year, when there were only a few teams playing and Milwaukee didn't, and then San Diego beat what was then Ontario in the finals, that Milwaukee didn't think that was a legitimate championship because they weren't in there. So they actually had the last legitimate championship. Well, you came back the next year and won it again. So
yeah, I kind of heard about that.
Yeah. But the other thing I would say about San Diego and the transition you've made, it harkens back. You talked about the end of the NASL. What few people remember was how San Diego got really, really good heading in that 84 season is that the Golden Bay Earthquakes were trying to move in, and they were shut out of the MISL, and then their players wound up becoming free agents. Well, if San Diego signs a Steve Jungle and signs a Fernando Clavillo as a free agent,
right.
And then you fast forward into the current era and get Tavoy Morgan. This isn't something new that San Diego has done. I give Phil Salvaggio and the front office all the credit in the world. Sean Bowers, I'm wearing his jersey, by the way. This is a page ripped out of the traditional soccer's playbook. Is how do you attract talent and say, we have a culture here, we have a winning culture, you will fit in. Now you have Drew Ruggles in. Now you have Gabriel Costa in. This is a place that it's been made really attractive for players to come in and then all of a sudden be competing for a championship. So kudos to San Diego that they figured it out very recently, how to pivot, and now legitimately the best team in the league. Even though you didn't win the championship this year, I would say if you looked at the roster, you would be the odds-on favorite.
Yeah. It's funny. I've spoken a lot about with these kind of conversations with Julie V when we have our lunches together. And one of the things that he has said is that marketing a star, putting each team, marketing a star, getting a star, having somebody that they can put out there on the billboards and put in the interview, on the local news stations during their sports broadcast, and get one guy, just one guy, figure out who's your star and put him out there and market that guy, would be a solid way of. Now, of course, that's coming from the guy who the Sockers did that with back when he was playing. so there's that. Okay, but it's an interesting concept of thought. When the MASL first became the MASL, there were a lot of teams that no longer exist. There was the first few years, there was a lot of attrition that came and went What I find is interesting is most of the legendary brands are still around. I mean, the Stars and the Comets and the Sockers and the Wave and the Blast, the Sidekicks. I mean, a lot of these legendary brands, although I get it, they're not the same legal entity, but the brand is there, and that's really important. But it seems like there's less of that attrition going on now. The teams that are there, the owners that are in it, they seem. I mean, granted, I know we lost the Florida Tropics, and that's a tragedy. Mainly, I say a tragedy because of the region, of the country that they were playing in. It sort of makes a hole on the map, and for the MASL, and also because they had become such a powerhouse team in the last few years. Making the finals and recently, and the semifinals recently, and being a good team on paper and on the field. But we're not losing 3 and 4 teams a year like we were when the league first started. And the teams that are here seem to be solid, and the ownership seems to be committed. And I love the ownership group. I love them all. They're just a great bunch of people.
Well, again, going back to the early era, every year in the MISL, it was like who's in, who's out, is the league in a fold? And so that's why I get people hearkening back to quote unquote good old days, but to quote Billy Joel, the good old days weren't always good, and tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. And so that would be my message is, yeah, it's going to be different moving forward, but was it really that good if you didn't know if your team was going to be around? And you would have 3 or 4 MISL teams folding at a time. And this league, this group of owners, the commissioner triad with JP, Shep, and Keith, focusing on stability, player development through the combine. I think if Guadalajara does come in, there are so many good indoor players, let alone players pivoting from outdoor in Mexico. I think that's an undertapped market in terms of talent. And so I think there's really good hope in the future. It just may not look the same as it has in the past. And people may have to adjust their point of view to accept what success might look like in the future.
I agree. When I went to Las Vegas a couple of years ago for the MISL 40th reunion, one of the things that came in the goodie bag that they gave everybody that attended was a T-shirt, and on the T-shirt was all of the logos of all of the teams that played at any point in time, even if it was just one season in the original MISL. Okay, and it loaded up the shirt. The shirt was full. I mean, there's logos, and a lot of them I have to, it kind of humbled me a little bit, because a lot of them, it was like, oh wow, yeah, I remember those guys, where if I were to have to list them today, even today, I would forget a bunch. There's a bunch of them that I would forget that didn't. That at one point played in that league. So yeah, there's always been that attrition. There's also always been other leagues playing simultaneously that are doing the same game in different markets. So the future going forward for the major arena soccer league with M2 and M3 is going to be I think a positive thing. I'd like a little bit more expansion, but at the same time, you want to be super careful about that as far as who you bring in as owners, and if they've felt out their marketplace well enough, so that they come in and have some kind of a base of operation and fan support. So, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, just maybe a perspective here to offer. So I like to joke. Well, I'll joke privately, but I'll share this with you that I'm a 1099 employee of the Kansas City Comets. I'm not a full-time employee. I do get paid a little, for announcing, but I get to do something I love.
Right.
There are players who want this, who want to extend their careers, and it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. No, you don't have Lionel Messi in this league. No, it's a different budget salary scale than it was in MISL, but that doesn't make it any less meaningful to everybody participating. And so I would encourage and maybe challenge your viewers, Greg, to think about this in different terms, which is success may not be benchmarking MASL with MLS, the English Premier League, or what MISL was in the 80s. But if it's offering opportunities in a way where people get to show their skills, whether it's on the field, off the field, or whatever, there's something to celebrate there. And I for sure don't compare myself to a Tai Keogh of the 80s or some of the MLS color announcers of the day. But I, for one, am grateful for the opportunity I've been given, because soccer was taken away from me at a really young age. And this league has given me something I'd kind of forgotten about, was why I fell in love with indoor soccer in the first place. So for me, I'm coming from maybe a perspective of gratitude and appreciation for where we are and hopefulness for where we're going.
I like that. I like it. In closing, I want to just remind everybody that tomorrow in Upland, California is the Kings Cup. It's going to be an all-day event. I have been informed that it's going to be broadcast on YouTube. There's going to be Canela, I think it's Canela Deportes, is going to be broadcasting in Spanish for, I think, 3 hours in the afternoon from 2 o'clock until 5 Pacific time. There was also a mention, I think, that the MASL Twitch channel might cover it. But I do know for sure that the YouTube is going to be all broadcasting all day. And I have been, I'm huge. I can't say this with enough emphasis. Hugely honored to have been asked to join Jonathan, the doctor, to broadcast with him the last half of the tournament from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon until the end of the tournament. I'll be doing color for his play-by-play on the YouTube broadcast. So tune in if you can't get to Upland, California, and check it out. I'm super anxious and a little nervous because I've done some PA work before, but this is going to be the first time that I've been on some of the broadcasts a little bit just as a guest, but this is going to be the first time that I've been trying to do color. So I hope I have a good broadcast, but make a contribution to the team. So I'm pretty excited about that. Let me see. The doctor just chimed in. Thank you so much for joining me today, Erik. I really appreciate talking to you. I mean, I knew given an opportunity to just sit down and chat, that all kinds of stuff would be able to come out of this conversation, because we do have a common history as far as being around as the sport as long as we have, and I really appreciate your candid nature and what you brought to the show today. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, and I'm excited to see the schedule come out soon. Hopefully the Sockers will come this way. It feels like it's been a while since the Sockers have played at Cable Dahmer Arena. We'd love to have them back in town.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I'm looking for that. I mean, and you just probably opened a, well, it's already a can of worms. It's open. Is everybody's anxious for the schedule to come out. And everybody's sort of chewing their nails off, trying to, when's it coming out? So I guess the story is it late this month?
That's what I've read.
Is it late September that they're saying?
That's what I've read. I'm looking forward to it. My calendar is going to be lit up, and not just with Comets games, but obviously anytime I can watch an MASL game and listen to other broadcasters, it's a great experience. So I'm looking forward to getting on my computer and lighting up my calendar and saving some dates.
All right. Well, I may come out, if I get a chance, I may come out to Overland Park to visit my brother if I have that opportunity, because he lives in Overland Park, if I have that opportunity, I will try to schedule it around a Kansas City game, and
Perfect.
so I can visit you guys. Hopefully that'll work out during the season. Once again, thanks very much. And Greg Study on Soccer with Erik Bergrud. We're going to sign off right now. It's been a little bit over an hour, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you, buddy.